Starting with the fact that the compass of 9 is the outline of what is a tetrahedron. Since we are now venturing into 3D shaped territory, we can move on from the compass of 9 and fill in the blanks. If there is a tetrahedron within the cube, then it stands to reason that its missing other half should be accounted for, the opposite pole. So, here is where that belongs. Simply by connecting the dots, we have not only a hexagram, but a particular type of hexagram. This is what is known as a unicursal hexagram. Aleister Crowley used this symbol for Thelema, so it's associated with the Thelemites and with the number 93. The Thelemites place a 5-pointed star in the centre, or a 5-petaled flower, the pentagram. The symbol is synonymous with the Egyptian Ankh and the rosy cross of the Rosicrucians. The symbol of the unicursal hexagram is drawn in a continuous line, rather than by two overlaid triangles. Now, this makes sense, as time is fluid and continuous. It's not broken into separate parts. The symbol has another slightly different variation, that being the sigil of Saturn, an 8-pointed version of the symbol, so there's our 8 again. The sigil of Saturn is also the sigil of Azazel, allegedly a fallen angel. Azazel was also mentioned in the Book of Enoch. Now, the movie Fallen with Denzel Washington is about Azazel, and his trademark throughout that movie is to sing the Rolling Stones song "Time Is On My Side." He will do that whenever he shows up. Not surprising, as Saturn is time. Understanding all of this, we can trace the sigil of Saturn here on the cube. And what do we have here? 8 points around the 9th in the centre. Just what we were looking for. If you recall how we originally got here in the first place, by dividing the 3 visible faces of the cube into 4 individually, you'll remember how each square became a 5. The fruit in the centre became a 5th point, making 3 5s in all, giving us 15. 12 round to 13, when the fact that the 5th point is really the fruit in the centre of the cube is taken into account, but 15 when you think of each divided square as a 5. Time is divided into 4 in order to see the fruit. On the clock, a minute is divided into 4 15s, and 15 is 6 in numerology. Each 15 falls at a 3, 6, 9 and 12. 12 is 3. The division of 4 reveals the 9, and 15 is the number on the clock of each division. So in the fractal sense, the division of time into 4 goes from the year with its 4 seasons, each season 3 months, so that's 4 threes. The month with its 4 sixes, each 6 surrounding the infinite 7 of Sunday in the centre, and the month itself on this fractal model is represented by the red spheres. The week with its 4 42s, as in 42 hours. The day with its 4 periods, each being 6 hours, so that's 4 sixes. The hour with its 4 quarters, 3, 6 and 9, and then 3 again, numerologically. And last but not least, the minute with its 4 15s. 15 is clearly tied in deeply with the division of time, as are 3 and 6. The 15 is also deeply tied in with the sigil of Saturn. The sigil of Saturn is derived from the magic square of Saturn. The magic square of Saturn is a column of 9 boxes. There are 3 rows across and 3 rows down. Numbers from 1 to 9 are placed in each box in a specific order. Each row, column and diagonal adds up to the number 15. 15 is one of Saturn, aka Time's special numbers. 3, 6, 9, 15 and 45 are all deeply tied in with Saturn. All of the numbers in the square add up to 45. Saturn's divine names all have a numerological value of 3, 9, or 15. Every planet is attributed an intelligence and a spirit. The intelligence and the spirit of Saturn each have a value of 45, calculated using Hebrew gematria. The seal of Saturn is drawn by connecting each number in order from 1 to 9. The resulting symbol is the seal of Saturn. The version that we have is basically a variation of this seal. And note that the 5 is in the centre where the G would be on the Freemasonic compass and the pentagram on the unicursal hexagram. The 5 and the pentagram are synonymous for obvious reasons. So we have found the 9 surrounded by the 8 in an alternative way. Let's return now to the fact that the interlocking triangles in our cube are in point of fact tetrahedrons, meaning we have a star tetrahedron in the cube. By turning the cube in various different directions, different symbols can be seen. The unicursal hexagram, the star tetrahedron, the smaller cube in the centre, etc, etc, etc. The tetrahedron, being a 3D shape, has some of its bottom half on both sides in view. Now, by highlighting the right areas, something else comes into view. Not only one, but 2 pentagrams, both interlocked, one upwards and one inverted. The fruit is, as always, in the centre, between the 2 pentagrams. Now, pentagrams are a symbol of 5, so 2 interlocking pentagrams would be 10. There is, of course, no 10 in numerology, only the return back to 1 again. The fruit being 10 in this case represents the entrance into the smaller cube from the bigger cube, going from 9 back to 1. Quite literally, square 1. Given that the dividing of the squares individually by 4 is how one starts this journey around the time cube, where in time can we find the manifestation of the 10? Well, the next fractal up from a year is a decade, and a decade is 10 years long. Then you have your centuries, which are 100 years long, so that's 10 tens. And all the while, there are leap years every 4 years. So the 4 always seems to show up one way or another. All in all, the 10 definitely has its signature in time. 10 is also a divine number. It is a Kepha, the crown on the tree of life. While 10 represents the return to 1, if used in the numerological sense, it's also the number of God. God in the geometric sense would be the circle surrounding everything, while 9 is the expression of God within the boundary of the star tetrahedron. 10 is also significant in relation to the Pythagorean concept of the tetraces. The tetraces is a 10-pointed triangular figure which is divided into 4 rows. Once again, the division of 4 springs up. Tetra literally means 4. The 4 rows in this case. Well, the tetraces was symbolic of the 4 elements of earth, fire, water and air, as well as the organisation of space. Each row from the top down represents 0 dimensions. Now we have a point, this would be the top. The second row is 1 dimension, a line of 2 points. The third is 2 dimensions, a plane defined by a triangle of 3 points. And the fourth is 3 dimensions, a tetrahedron defined by its 4 points. Pythagoras was said to have based his musical system on the rows of the tetraces, reading the rows as the ratio of 4 to 3, the perfect fourth, 3 to 2, the perfect fifth, and 2 to 1, the octave, forming the basic intervals of the Pythagorean scales. The Hebrews have a tetraces, which, by the way, can also be called the decad. But on the Hebrew version, the 4-lettered name of the tetragrammaton, YHWH in English, was inscribed on the 10 positions from right to left. In Gematria, these letters add up to the number 72, and they represent the 72 names of God. So that is 10 briefly summed up, and its manifestation in time is the decade and the 10/10s of the century. The two interlocking pentagrams can in that sense be thought of as representative of those particular aspects of time. What happens then if we break a decade into 4? Well, 10 divided by 4 is 2.5. That's 2.5. So your decade divided by 4 is 2.5 years. And 2.5 years is 30 months, bringing us right back to the multiples of 3 and 6. And therefore, pointing right back to the 9. In summary, the decade divided by 4 is 30 months. The year divided by 4 is 3 months. The month divided by 4 is 4 weeks. The week divided by 4 is 4 42s. And since a week is 7 days, 7 over 4 is 1.75. If you class the week as 6 days around the 7th and apply that to the month, then you get 4 6s around the centre. And the 4 6s are 24. So 24 days. The day is 24 hours in 4 intervals of 6. The hour, 60 minutes in 4 quarters. Each quarter, 15 minutes, producing a pattern of 3, 6, 9, 3, 3, 6, 9, 3, 3, 6, 9 endlessly. All of these numbers are related to the cube. The 6 faces or the 6 fours, giving us our 24. The 3 visible faces give us 12. The 7 visible corners, the 12 edges, and then there is the cube as a whole with 8 corners. The squares of the cube, when divided into 4, yield 1, the open portal, or the 4 around the 5. The 3 visible faces, each divided into 4, equal 15. And if all 6 faces were divided, we would have 30. So it's clear that time is synonymous with the cube for good reason. And 4 is an important factor in revealing the 9 at the centre of time. The 12 around the 13, the 6 around the 7, not to mention the 5 or the pentagram in the centre. Time is, after all, the 4th dimension, allegedly. This brings us back to the verse in Revelation chapter 22 about the tree of life bearing 12 fruits and yielding its fruits every month. What does it mean by yielding its fruit every month? Well, it's referring to the division of 4. The month in this case being the 4. Every fractal of time divides into 4, and on the cube, dividing the 4 yields the 5. Aka the fruit, the Xbox or the open portal. This is why if you Google search Revelation 22, you will get images such as this. The river of the water of life, flowing from the throne of God. As you can see, it's divided into 4, symbolic of the open portal to Eden or the New Jerusalem. Here's another one. The throne of God leading to the point in the centre. The division of 4, aka the tree yielding its fruit every month. Now before we move on, we may as well unveil Isis in the geometric sense and remove not just her 7 veils, but all 8 of them, the 8 corners of the cube. What happens if you cut all 8 corners off of a cube? Well, you get a cube octahedron. The cube octahedron has 12 vertices, 14 faces, and 24 edges. The architect, Buckminster Fuller, who is the patent holder of the geodesic dome, called the cube octahedron the vector equilibrium. The vector equilibrium has 6 square faces and 8 triangular faces. The 12 vertices are identical, with 2 triangles and 2 squares meeting at each. The 24 edges each separate a triangle from a square. The radius of the enclosing sphere, which touches all 12 vertices, is identical to the length of all of its sides. According to Buckminster Fuller, the mathematical blueprint for the universe itself and the structure of the vacuum of space was something called the isotropic vector matrix. The isotropic vector matrix is a collection of 20 tetrahedrons stacked on top of each other. 10 on the bottom layer, 6 on the second, 3 on the third, and 1 on the top. If you view this structure from one of its sides, it would look like this. 4 levels, 1 on top, 2 on the next level down, 3 on the next, and 4 on the bottom. In other words, this structure is identical to the Tetragrammaton of the Hebrews, based on the way the Hebrew letters are laid out. 1 letter at the top, 2 on the next layer down, 3 on the next, and 4 on the bottom. Compared to the Pythagorean tetraces, each row of triangles on the isotropic vector matrix would be synonymous with the points on the tetraces. 1 on the top, 2 below, 3 on the third, and 4 at the bottom. Now this is just viewing the isotropic vector matrix from one side. Like I said, there are 20 in all, stacked on top of one another. Nassim Haramein discovered that within the centre of the isotropic vector matrix, there are a set of 4 downward pointing tetrahedrons. Well, downward pointing tetrahedrons are negative, whereas upward pointing tetrahedrons would be positive. So if there are a set of negative tetrahedrons, then obviously there needs to be a set of positive tetrahedrons that would slide into the negative slots in order for there to be equilibrium. Now, since the isotropic vector matrix as a whole is one upward pointing tetrahedron, it can only be one half of the structure because it's missing its negative half, a negative downward pointing isotropic vector matrix. So when you slide the two together, you would have your equilibrium. Once you've done this, you have reconciled the problem in the centre of the isotropic vector matrix of this group of negative downward pointing tetrahedrons by uniting them. Now you have a star tetrahedron, and in the centre, none other than the vector equilibrium. So what you get when you unveil Isis, that is when you cut all of the corners off of a cube, is a vector equilibrium, the very structure of the vacuum of space, if Nassim Haramein is correct. Now this lends further credence to Isis being space and Saturn being time, from which she unfolds. Haramein made yet another discovery based on a slight problem. The star tetrahedron model of the isotropic vector matrix, consisting now of 40 individual tetrahedrons, the original 20, plus the additional 20 of its negative pole, still had holes in its faces that needed to be accounted for. In order to reconcile this, an additional 24 tetrahedrons needed to be added. There's that number again, 24, which shows up in the fractal of time. 24 hours of the day, the 24 days of the month, or when the month has its Sundays subtracted. All multiples of 3 and 6, 12 around the 13, the 12 months around the sun. Add another year, that's 24 months, and on it goes. So 24 is a fractal in time. When Haramein added his 24 additional tetrahedrons, he made a very startling discovery. The star tetrahedron isotropic vector matrix became another vector equilibrium. So not only is there a vector equilibrium in the centre of this structure, but now the structure itself has become a vector equilibrium. In other words, it's just like the cube within a cube, infinitely unfolding in fractals of 3, 6, 12, 24, and so on and so forth. So the vector equilibrium is a vector equilibrium within another vector equilibrium, infinitely unfolding in fractals. Now, the addition of the extra 24 tetrahedrons to the existing 40 makes 64 tetrahedrons in all. Nassim Haramein calls this structure the 64 tetrahedron grid. Basically, it grows in scales of 8, perfect octaves. If you take the 64 tetragrid apart, you will find that it consists of 8 separate star tetrahedrons combined as one to form one giant vector equilibrium. The vector equilibrium itself is an inside-out star tetrahedron. The star tetrahedron radiates outward and is therefore masculine, or the positive pole, while the vector equilibrium is a star tetrahedron folded in on itself. So the 8 individual tetrahedrons of the star tetrahedron fold inwards to create the vector equilibrium, meaning the vector equilibrium is the female polarity, the negative. All in all, what this means is that the 64 tetrahedron grid is in perfect harmony, masculine and feminine, pushing and pulling, expanding and contracting. It's a lot like breathing, in, out, constantly. Each new fractal yields 8 new star tetrahedrons. It doubles on itself. In other words, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and so on and so forth. The 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5. Binary 369. Not only does it double outward and halve inward, but it does so in perfect octaves. 8. What we can deduce from that is that it's 8 around the 9. 8 star tetrahedrons around one vector equilibrium, the 9. So the number 4 is by default important again, as each 8 is 2 4s, and from multiples of 4 you get your 12 and your 24. The 8 infinitely unfolding, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, ad infinitum. Now abbreviated that will be 888, the number of Christ. If you want to apply that to the cube, it would be 666. But don't freak out, it's just a number. It doesn't make the cube evil. It's just a hexagon unfolding, which is a cube unfolding in 3D. If you look at a vector equilibrium in 2D, it's a hexagon. It's a matter of perspective. The vector equilibrium unfolding fractally in 2D will look something like this. 6 unfolding infinitely around the 7. The 8 triangular faces of the vector equilibrium represent the 8 around the 9. The 6 square faces are, as with the cube, 6 around the 7. The 12 vertices are the 12 around the 13. Vertices are corners. There are also 24 edges. So again, 24 unfolding at each fractal. The 64 tetrahedron grid also fits perfectly on the flower of life. Since the 64 tetrahedron grid is a vector equilibrium, it has all the standard properties of that particular geometry, but its 14 faces are made up of smaller faces, 144 faces in all. Half of 144 is 72, which is interesting considering the 72 names of God, since those names are encoded on the tetragrammaton in the form of gematria. And the tetragrammaton is triangular, meaning it is the 2D equivalent of a tetrahedron, making it one half of a star tetrahedron, which I find very compelling. Concerning the number 144, there are some interesting correlations in Revelation chapter 21 verses 15 to 18 describing the New Jerusalem. Quote, "And he talked with me, and had a golden reed to measure the city, and the gates thereof, and the wall thereof. And the city lieth foursquare, and the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with reed, 12,000 furlongs. The length and the breadth and the height of it are equal. And he measured the wall thereof, 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is of the angel. And the building of the wall of it was jasper, and the city was pure gold, like unto clear glass. Unquote. So right away, we find that the wall of the New Jerusalem is 144 cubits, just like the 144 faces of the 64 tetrahedron grid. Now it's also interesting that the 144 cubits is about equal to 65 metres. The wall is the outermost part of the city, so could easily be compared with the outermost part of the 64 tetra grid. As for the 144 cubits being equal to 65 metres, think 64 around a 65 in the centre, and that would make more sense. 144 is also equal to 72 yards, so once again the 72 pops up. The length, breadth and the height of the New Jerusalem are all described as equal. Well, the 64 tetrahedron grid is a vector equilibrium, the only geometry where the radius of the centre, which touches all 12 vertices, is exactly equal to the length of all of its sides, hence the name vector equilibrium. So, it's a perfect match to the equilibrium of the New Jerusalem. The city is described as foursquare, so the division of 4 makes yet another appearance. 144 divided by 4 equals 36, another multiple of the 3, 6 and 9. Now also in Revelation chapter 21 verses 12 to 13, describing the New Jerusalem, quote, "It had a great wall and high, and had 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates." Unquote. What is being described here is likely the 12 vertices of the vector equilibrium. They are once again divided by 4 and oriented with the compass north, east, south and west. 3 gates in each cardinal point. Well, since the base of the city is a square, I can assume that this means it rests on one of its 6 square faces. However you may feel about all of this, the correlations are fascinating. Now, as I said earlier, the 64 tetrahedron grid also fits perfectly on the flower of life. The 64 grid is literally what the flower of life would look like in 3D. The flower of life is an ancient symbol. It can be seen here inscribed on the wall of the ancient Assyrian temple. According to Harameen, this thing was burned into the wall somehow, as if with a laser. Then there is this from the Forbidden City in Beijing, China. And this is the Fu Dog. It was known as the guardian lion. It was said to be a guardian of knowledge. As you can see, it has its paw on the spherical flower of life. So it is quite literally guarding the knowledge. Now this palace was home to the 24 Ming and Qing dynasties. Interesting that it should be 24, as the fractals of the 64 tetra grid grow in perfect octaves of 8 star tetrahedrons at a time. So 8 times 8, which would give you 64, and 24 is a multiple of 8. But more importantly, the vector equilibrium has 24 edges. So with each new fractal comes 24 edges. 24 is also the number of tetrahedrons that needed to be added to the already existing 40 to make the 64. 64 is an important number in many areas. There are the 64 codons of human DNA, the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, the 64 generations from Adam to Christ, the 64 manifestations of Lord Shiva in Hinduism, the 64 squares of the chessboard, and the Beatles have a song called When I'm 64. If you recall, the Beatles also revealed the hidden octave with the song 8 Days a Week. Why? Because they were the Fab Four, aka the Four Seasons, the Four Cardinal Directions, the division of 4. Well, 64 divided by 4 is 16, which is 2 eighths, or 2 octaves. And 16 divided by 4 is 4. No wonder then that the Beatles covered Chuck Berry's Sweet Little 16. Now, I've already explained how the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are the lower 4 chakras, but that is just one fractal. As clearly, the division of 4 is relevant at every level, every fractal. As above, so below. So the 4 horsemen are another manifestation of this division of 4. Now, in a strange twist, Charles Manson used to say that the Beatles were the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and it is with this that I'm going to return to the subject of the tears.